I've been using AI when coding ever since it became good at it, and I find it really helpful. Now, few of my students say it helps them too, but many tell me quite the opposite, that it doesn't really work, that it even does more harm than good. And I can definitely believe that. I mean, in the video where I coded a game with ChatGPT, it made many questionable decisions. But I still considered it a success because we pulled it off in record time. Now, the real reason it worked for me is because I knew how to code a project like that. I was just supervising, guiding it, and even taking over when needed. I never fully trust it because I don't think AI is at the level it can code without mistakes. You can see in my live streams when I use AI like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot, I almost always do something with what it gives me. I don't just leave it as such. So, is AI useless if you don't already know how to code? No. It's actually very good at helping you learn. You just need to ask it the right things and know what to expect. In this video, I'll use the free version of ChatGPT and we'll rate it at 4 different coding related tasks. So get your coding editors ready and let me teach you how to chat with the chat. Get it? Because ChatGPT is a chat. Oh no, oh no, no.
Gonna code, debug, and have fun. Coding with Radu, coding with Radu. Gonna prototype and design. Coding with Radu, coding with Radu. Let's code now.
Something I think ChatGPT is really good at is explaining some code. And it's really helpful when you're about to see some code for the first time and you want to quickly understand what it does. We're going to simulate this by checking the codebase from the self-driving car project. And you can get this link from the video description. We are going to focus only on the code from the first lesson in that tutorial series. So this car driving mechanics and these files, car, controls, index, main, style, these are what I have here in VS Code in a folder. If you open index.html in a browser, you will get this. So using the keys on the keyboard, you can move that car up and down. At the moment, it just looks like the rectangle, and you can also make it turn like this, and it can also go in reverse with the down arrow key. So this is what we are going to try to use ChatGPT to explain. What is this code doing? And we can start asking it about HTML code, for example. I can type here, can you please tell me what is this code doing? And I'm going to paste this here. And it recognizes this as HTML code, and then each line essentially is explained, and the explanation looks really proper. Yeah, of course it doesn't know what the 3 external JavaScript files are, but we can ask it about those as well. So we can go, for example, to main.js here and take this JavaScript code. Can you please explain main.js? And it breaks it down into different components. So first, indeed, this canvas setup. Setting the width to 200 pixels. That's why we get this road here quite thin. The idea was that by the end of this phase 1 of the course, there is a narrow road with a lot of cars as obstacles.
Then getting the 2D canvas context here, creating a car object. It doesn't know what the car code is yet. We haven't given it yet, but it's figuring out that these first two might be the start position of the car, and then the width of the car and the height of the car. This is true, but it's very interesting because it can't say for sure just knowing this. It could be that this is the width and this is the height and this is the x and y. So this could be a speculation that could be a mistake. But probably because code like this tends to specify the position first, it makes this assumption. And if the person writing this code did a good job and is familiar with a lot of things like this, it's probably going to be following the same rules. But just notice that it would be possible for it to make mistakes here, and now luckily it didn't. And I'm gonna give it the car code as well, but before that, let's check quickly this animation loop. So it starts the animation loop, recursively calling it yes here inside of request animation frame, and then update the state of the car, position, velocity, and so on. And yes, the canvas is set to be the full size of the window, making it responsive. That was the idea when building it. Like if I opened developer tools here and resize the window, you can see that this canvas is taking the full size like so. And then drawing the car on the context and scheduling the next frame. Pretty much perfect at the moment. So if you don't know any of these things, you can ask questions and you will get usually good answers. And even this guess is a good answer here. So let's give it more. This one is probably the most complex. It is the most complex file here by far. Can you please explain the car code? So it's still generating there, but let's have a look at this part. The constructor, initial position, width, height, max speed. Yeah, and notice here it uses the word presumably handles the input to control the car. And this time it's great that it uses the word presumably here because we haven't given yet the controls information. It doesn't know anything about this controls.js file. So not as confident as before, and that's a good thing. Now it moves on to the update method, which calls move, and then the private move method. It's private because it's marked like this. And notice here, it decides to add comments into this. The code doesn't have these comments here, but it decides to do it because it's a good way of explaining what is going on here. So indeed, accelerating, decelerating, depending on if you press forward or reverse. Then there is a speed limit of max speed or 3 when going forward and half of that when going in reverse, so it goes slower in reverse. Applying the friction and then turning. With a little bit more details here at the end. So this is nice. And finally here we have the draw method and recognizes that the car is drawn as a rectangle representing the car's body. And that the rectangle is centered at 0, 0 with width and height as properties. And that is true, but only because we do a transformation on the context before to translate at the car's location and rotate by the inverse of the angle here. So it notices this as well. and points out that it restores the previous transformation matrix so that consecutive calls are not going to make a weird effect happening. Turns out these are not necessary because in the code here, setting the height of the canvas also restores everything. So people have noticed that that was kind of a extra thing, but it's the default practice. So ChatGPT doesn't notice anything wrong with that. And finally, let's give also the controls here. Can you please explain the controls as well? Indeed, these are the possible inputs, and they are set to false, indicating no input when the page loads. And the add keyboard listeners is going to handle this on key down and on key up. Checks whether the key was pressed and sets the corresponding property. Right, so no mistakes here. And let's quickly look at the CSS code as well. Please explain the styles as well. This is very good. It even says the reason for these things, like overflow hidden. The reason I added it was to prevent the scroll bars from appearing, and all the other attributes are properly explained as well. Now, another thing ChatGPT is really good at is finding bugs in the code. Let me show you, but first we have to generate some kind of bugs here. So let's try something like maybe remove a curly brace here. Now, removing this makes the interface here point out that there are some problems happening, but it doesn't say that there is something specifically wrong here. It just notices here some issues because there's a closing brace and not a corresponding opening one there. So let's see what happens if we run this now. And we get this. It's definitely broken. And if we open the developer tools, it says unexpected token this, car is not defined, and line 46, so it points to this as a problem, which is not the actual problem, and car is not defined is equally confusing. So the error messages don't tell us much. But if we are going to copy this code and ask ChatGPT, what is the problem here? It notices that there is syntax error causing incorrect behavior, lack of braces around the block following the if condition. And then it recommends to put back that curly brace. So pretty much immediately we get the root of the problem here. And now everything works again. Now, sometimes the error might be something that isn't really an error appearing anywhere. Like, for example, if I'm going to set here capital speed plus equals to something, then it's going to define a new attribute here with a capital S and modify that instead. So if I'm going to refresh and I go backwards, it works. But if I'm going to go forward, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work because speed with the lowercase is not increasing, right? These are very hard to spot because you don't get any kind of indication that something is wrong unless you notice these dot 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 here. That is, it's a small thing, and the behavior is just not what you expect, and no errors appearing in the console as well. So asking it now, can you find any problems here? Typo in speed assignment. This is immediately noticed here. So should be speed. It's case sensitive, so speed and speed are different variables. Very good. And these are really hard to see. Like you might do some typo like this, or sometimes even a weirder typo, like maybe this L could be replaced with the 1 like this. And this kind of thing happens a lot. In class, sometimes we spend maybe 5-10 minutes figuring out a typo like this in some students' computers. And ChatGPT was able to identify it immediately, pretty much. So really useful. And then it also points out here incorrect movement calculation. It's not a problem. It's just pointing out that maybe you think angle is in degrees, but it's actually not. It's defined to be in radians in this code. Another thing ChatGPT can do is suggest improvements in the code. So let's say we give it this move method and ask if it can write it in a better way or improve it in some way. Let me copy it like so. Is there a way to improve this method? Okay, so we get this method. Let's copy it here and see if it actually is better. Now notice before I paste it, it started on line 21 and it went all the way to line 58. Now it's starting on 21 and it goes to 48. So it's an indication that if this works, it might be an improved version because there's less code, but we are not 100% sure about that yet. So let's just save this and try running the code to see if it still works like before. And I can't tell if it's any different than before, so I think it is working as before. But why is it shorter? So I'm going to undo pasting this, and I'm going to go here at the top, so that move is at the top, and paste ChatGPT's version here on the right for comparison. And this part of the code seems to be the same as we have it here, but then speed limiting, it has a one-liner here. And I think this was suggested by somebody even in the video comments. Yeah, you can cap the speed like this because taking the minimum of the max speed and speed means that if the speed increases beyond that, max speed will be the minimum. And then the result from this minimum check, we do a maximum for minus max speed divided by 2. So the maximum between this and whatever comes as the second will be this value if the second thing is below that, or if it goes below the accepted bound. So yeah, you can write this whole thing in one line like this. Then the friction here, let's see what happens. If the speed is greater than 0, minus the friction, otherwise plus the friction. So indeed, this is more of an if-else here, because we can't have speed above 0 and below 0, so it's either this or that, and it recognized that properly, and it wrote this using a ternary operator here, again in one line, so this works. It can actually be made even shorter if you take out this code from here and paste it here, like so directly. You don't take out the friction amount anymore like this. And it's the same result. But then there is this line of code here that is not considered at all. It caused a weird bug in the implementation. Removing this and moving the car a little bit, it's not very easy to reproduce, but sometimes depending on when you release the up arrow or the down arrow, because of floating point values there, if I zoom in here, you can see the car is moving slowly and I'm not pressing anything. This is kind of a glitch, an artifact here, and ChatGPT just removed it. So if we don't have a code like this, then it's going to have some problem here. Let's keep it in mind and maybe ask ChatGPT why did it remove this piece of code. But let's look also at the angle, because this code here also seems to be smaller. So it added a ternary operator here as well for the left. If it's left, then this is going to be a value of 1. Otherwise, if it's right, it's going to be a value -1. And then if none of them are pressed, then we have a value of 0 there. So it doesn't go in any of these ifs. So using 1 and -1 basically makes this plus-minus behavior here. I find it a little bit confusing like this, but it is shorter, and some people prefer it even though it has 2 of these ternary operators there, actually. So shorter code, same logic, much shorter than here, really. But I don't know. What do you guys think? And then the last part is the same. And many lines shorter than what we had previously, including even comments that explain what the code is doing, and it was still shorter than here. Now let me copy this version back here, and before I remove this other version, let me cut this line. And ask, why did you remove this line? Aha, so it actually recognized that that is an important piece of code and re-added it here. If you don't like something, like maybe this line, I don't like it, it's too long. This line is a bit too long. Can something be done about it? I find this much clearer than before. So definitely you can also interact with it when getting improvements and not just accepting everything, but questioning some things that you find questionable. Now, one more thing that ChatGPT could be useful for is if we want this car to look a little bit different, maybe it can help us generate a different draw method. Like maybe I would like to have a pointy tip here. Let's see what would happen. It's not a very big change, so I think it should be able to do okay. I'm going to copy this draw method again so it knows what I'm talking about and say, can you please draw the car so it has a pointy front? Okay, so it's doing something different. Let's just see if the code works first. Save and refresh. And it doesn't. It looks like there is some bug with this. Normally, this is the kind of feedback I get from students, that they ask it to do something and then when it does, it's not really working. And it's obvious that this can happen because when it generates that code, it doesn't try it and then it can't see the end result in the same way that we see it. So maybe from its quick logic that it designed here, it may look good, but then there is something probably wrong somewhere. So if I undo, the previous code looked like this. It just did the rectangle from this location with these properties. And what it wanted to do now is essentially draw the rectangle starting from that same corner and then going towards the right and then going downwards and then going towards the left. So I think that without this other line here, these should be equivalent. Let's see. So I'm going to comment out this line here. And this does look like a rectangle, but what happens in the last line here, it's kind of nonsense. It moves back up here and then goes here to close the path. So kind of becoming a pointy thing here, but not at the correct location, not at all. You could fix it and use this kind of code to fix it, but it's not really ideal. Like maybe we can do the line 2 here, like so. And now it looks a little bit like what I described, but now this doesn't work well because the car is longer than expected. It has extra 10 pixels here. So for it to make more sense, everything else should have been with plus 10, these top things there. So let me just do this fix myself, because if I start to explain to ChatGPT that these are the things that you should do, it starts to become very difficult to find words for those things. Anyway, this is an update now, and maybe you want the front to be a curve instead. in that case, I think ChatGPT might be able to actually help us out. So let me remove these comments from here because they might confuse now what this is. And again, the reason why I know that it might now help us out is because I've used it a bit and I figured out what it can do and can't do. And I have some kind of experience with level of auto generation that tends to work. So now if I go here and ask, can you make the pointy part round? So it suggests using this quadratic curve 2 method. And let's just copy this code. Save, refresh, and looks a little bit funny, but definitely round. And you could work with this, make this even better. How about it? Have you used large language models when coding? Which ones? And did you find them useful or did they do more harm than good? Thanks for watching and see you guys.